Han Sen used his scabbard to block. He felt a huge power surging, and he was sent flying. He was sent spinning through the air, but he still managed to land gracefully when the momentum of the impact was gone. But even so, he ended up coughing up blood. The xenogenic Vic had turned into was far stronger than Roxfall Duke. Before Han Sen was back up on his feet, Vic was jumping forward with 10 of its nails raised like spiteful daggers. They were speeding down at Han Sen, fueled with Sky Demon power. Han Sen's power alone would not be sufficient to challenge xenogenic Vic. So, he moved quickly and dodged the attack. "Isha, are you not going to assist?" Han Sen said coldly. Isha smiled. "Didn't I say there is a section where I'd be needing your help? This is it. He is all yours. I am sure you can handle it, so you take care of this and I'll wait for you inside. As for the teeth earlier, we'll have one each. I'll hold on to yours. When you're done here, come and get it from me." After that, Isha picked up the rabbit's 2 teeth. Then, she flew to the bridge. When there, she walked forward. Strangely, when Isha started to traverse the bridge, it began to shake. But no liquid fired upward like a geyser. Isha was able to get in close to the crystal sphere. "I can't help you here either. So, I think I'll go on." Hawk Wing clenched his teeth and followed Isha. Hawk Wing walked the same way carefully, but he too noticed there were no more pillars of milk. When Isha and Hawk Wing approached the crystal sphere, they entered it and were gone. Han Sen lifted his lips. He was not surprised about what she had done. Han Sen had almost killed her, and he had taken the scabbard that once belonged to the rebate elder. Isha probably would have liked to see him dead, more than anyone. It'd be strange if she earnestly cooperated with him. But what confused Han Sen the most was why something only happened to Roxfall Duke and Vic when they tried traversing the bridge. Why did nothing happen to Isha and Hawk Wing? Vic's xenogenic form was roaring as he continued chasing Han Senator. Its speed and power were greater than Han Sen's, too. Even though Han Sen could evade its unmissable technique, he couldn't fight back. When Isha and Hawk Wing disappeared into the crystal sphere, Han Sen smiled. His scabbard started to leak purple smoke. Vic screamed as his body began to crack and bleed profusely. The wounds began to grow in length and width. But this was not because of Han Senator. This was because when Vic had fought against the rabbit had hurt him a great deal. Roxfall Duke's xenogenic form was a rabbit that used teeth power. The wounds weren't too severe, at first, and when the rabbit was killed, Vic didn't think anything of the wounds. But the teeth power always remained. Even when Vic himself became a xenogenic, the wounds were only suppressed for a time. The transformation didn't clean and get rid of the teeth force and residue that still resided within his wounds. Isha could use her teeth knife to trigger the teeth power in Vic's wounds, but she hadn't done that. Han Sen knew she was up to something. Fortunately, Han Sen himself now had the teeth powers. He wasn't as proficient as Isha with them, but it was enough to trigger Vic's wounds. Vic's injuries were spreading and becoming more severe. With Han Sen's teeth power and teeth knife mind, Vic's body began to crack open. It wasn't fast, but it was steady and scary. That wasn't the scariest thing about it either. The scariest thing about it all was the bleeding effect. Blood seeped out of the wounds, running faster over time. The more Vic moved, the more Vic bled. A few of his wounds were bleeding at the same time, and unless Vic had the necessary power to halt such bleeding, it wouldn't matter how strong he was. He'd end up dead before long. And it was already clear Vic could not stop the bleeding. He eventually started to lose consciousness. Even if he could have stopped it, it was probably too late. Now, Vic's mind was reduced to the most primitive thought process: killing. He didn't care about his oozing wounds, and all he could think about was killing Han Sen. Han Sen's body was like a phoenix in flight. He dodged all of Vic's skills, and not long after, Vic's power and speed began to decrease. He had lost so much blood. Most of the platform had been covered in slippery crimson. Padong. Vic had almost been drained of all the blood in his body. He fell on the ground and wheezily roared. He wanted to come at Han Sen again, but he couldn't stand upright. Han Sen used the scabbard with teeth sword skills on Vic, which made the cracks and wounds grow bigger. The last bit of the creature's blood was beginning to ooze. A little while later, Vic's tether to life snapped. He could only twitch on the ground as the last few drops of blood trickled out. Xenogenic Viscount hunted. Xenogenic gene found. Purple Horn Demon. Teeth powers are great. They're no worse than falsified sky powers. But strangely, Xenogenic Vic was far stronger than Roxfall Duke. Why was he only considered a Viscount? Han Sen wondered. Suddenly, Vic's body began to leak a white juice. And then, the liquid ran back to the bridge. Now Han Sen understood that the liquid down below was not all aggressive and insanity-inducing. Only some of it had a problem. That was how Isha and Hawkwing had been able to get by safely. But now that the insanity-inducing white liquid had returned, if Han Sen had to cross the bridge, he'd have to deal with the same danger that Vic did.
Han Sen hesitated.
He removed Vic's horn and put it into his bag. He mounted the bridge and ran straight for the crystal sphere. After just a few seconds, he heard an explosion come from below the bridge. A pillar of liquid soared through the sky. It began to cast a white rain, threatening Han Sen. Han Sen prepared to summon his steel Sagittarius shield for protection from the white liquid. But when the white milk came close, it stopped in the air. The streams of white liquid gathered up together, as if they had life and consciousness. It looked at Han Sen and then dropped back down below the bridge. Han Sen was shocked. He had no clue what was going on, and he certainly had no idea why the white liquid would let him go and not want to be a part of his body. Without hesitation, Han Sen walked right up to the crystal sphere. The bridge led to the very top of the crystal sphere, and when Han Sen reached the end, he noticed there was an entrance at its top. The orb's interior was hollow. It was like a football stadium. He could see Hawkwing and Isha conducting battle in there. What shocked Han Sen the most was that Hawkwing, who always seemed so indecisive and reckless, was fighting Isha and not showing signs of losing. Even I didn't see that coming. He's a powerful guy. Han Sen was shocked that Hawkwing's powers were no less than Isha's. His hands were like hooks, striking against Isha's hands that wielded teeth power. The teeth powers were unable to break his hands. I can't believe the champion of Skybird entered Demon Grave and pretended to be little more than a noob. I am surprised you endured such self-humiliation for so long. Isha laughed coldly. Hawkwing hummed and said, I am one of the 12 skies in Beast Area. What can you say about yourself? The rebate knife queen that pretends to be nobody. It's not that great to be one of the 12 skies. You'll be qualified if 12 skies come together. Isha sounded disdainful. If we were outside Demon Grave right now, I would not be as proficient as you. After all, you are half deified. But this is Demon Grave, so what matter is it what you are? Take that deified title away, and you and I are practically the same. Hawkwing hummed coldly. Really? Isha stared directly into Hawkwing's eyes as her knife-wielding hands started to become furious. Han Sen looked away from the pair for a bit to get a better look at the surroundings. That place was like a circular stadium. There was a crystal platform, and above it, there was a crystal hallway to get down to the center. The pipes there ran with white liquid, and a lot of the pipes ran to the white juice at the center of the pool. He did not know where the pool connected to, and even though vast amounts of the white stuff were being pumped in, the level did not rise. There was nothing else inside the sphere. Hawkwing and Isha were fighting each other near the pool, prohibiting each other from getting close to it. Hawkwing's movements were strong. They weren't too different from Han Sen's Phoenix movements. He had wings, of course. That was different from Han Sen, who had to use strength. Overall, though, Hawkwing's focus was on speed. That was also different from Han Sen, who had the abilities of prediction and formation. He was very fast, though, and with his hook-like claws, Isha could do very little. If this was a real fight, Hawkwing could not beat Isha. But Hawkwing wasn't looking to kill her outright. He just wanted to open a window of opportunity that would allow him to reach the pool without interference. That worried Isha a lot. Her movements were good, but her speed was a little worse than Hawkwing's. If she missed, Hawkwing could fall into the pool. Han Sen was peeping at the pair from the outside, not yet daring to enter. They were two opponents that would be difficult to deal with. He planned to wait outside, and maybe sneakily nab an easy kill if one became available. As Han Sen watched them, something moved in his pocket. Then, that softball jumped out of it. It started to spin around on the ground, before rolling into the crystal sphere by its own volition. The ball looked sticky, and it traced the walls down. It seemed to be following the pipes towards the pool. Isha and Hawk Wing were intently focused on each other, so they didn't notice anything else enter. That aside, they wouldn't dare think a ping-pong ball-like object would come rolling in like that. And with the pipes obscuring their view of it, the ball was able to roll all the way down and enter the pool. Han Sen thought something might happen if the ball entered the pool, but everything was quiet after it entered. The pool was still the same. Isha and Hawk Wing were fighting harder than ever. Because they were slowly running out of stamina, their fighting abilities had become weaker after the duration of their combat. Now you could tell who was truly better. Isha's power was weaker, but her skills had not wavered over time. She wasn't making any mistakes. Hawk Wing's skills weren't as good as Isha's, but he was weaker now than he had been earlier. Furthermore, his movements now were a bit twisted. His missteps were too small to be considered real mistakes, but they were there nonetheless. Isha was taking advantage of that. With those advantages, Isha took the opportunity to take a hack at his shoulder. Hawk Wing's face changed, and he wished to fall back. But it was too late. His shoulder had a 2-centimeter cut, and it only hurt the skin. But that was enough, and the wound continued to expand and bring blood with it. The teeth power is too cruel. When you fight someone with that power, you really can't afford to get hurt in the slightest. Otherwise, you are dead. Han Sen complimented her in his head, but he was really happy he had managed to learn teeth power. Knife Queen, D***menu. Hawk Wing flapped his wings and tried to fly towards the exit with the speed and straightness of an arrow. He was too fast, and Isha could not stop him. Demon Grave suppressed powers a lot when Hawk Wing was further away. The effectiveness of the wound would be weaker. Hawk Wing flew out of the exit with a disheartened feeling. It would have been difficult to get the treasure regardless, but Knife Queen had pretended to be a woman called Isha. It was all his bad luck. As he thought of this, he felt a pain in his head. He felt as if he had been struck by a rod. He saw stars as he fell to the ground. Han Sen grabbed his body and kept him from falling. He couldn't make any noise. Isha's attention was now focused on the pool. When she walked in front of it, she looked excited. Han Sen did not hesitate, and he too now snuck into the sphere. He was headed for Isha, and as he came up behind her, he had his scabbard ready to give her a whack. Assaulting a half-deified elite on the outside would have been impossible, but here, her senses were weaker. This would not be a difficult attack to pull off. The champion Hawkwing had been knocked out by Han Sen, and that had been quite easy. Han Sen moved behind Isha silently, and just as he was about to hit her over the head, his heart sank. Isha had been standing near the pool, looking into it, but when Han Sen silently slipped up to the side of the pool, he saw his shadow and Isha's. She was looking at him with shock. Han Sen gritted his teeth and still committed to his attack. Isha was able to dodge, though. She frowned and said, "How did you get here? Even if you did kill Vic, how did you manage to cross the bridge?" Han Sen did not stop swinging his scabbard at her. He was using it like a sword, trying to strike her. It would be best to kill her now, while she was a little worn out. "I walked here. It wasn't all that difficult." Han Sen attacked her, while also saying things to attack her mind. Isha wouldn't be affected by such weak mental attacks, though. Her movements were still strong and calculated, and mistakes weren't going to come easy. But she had just fought Hawkwing, and that made her a little frustrated. She was at a disadvantage now, fighting Han Sen. Isha was so angry, and she wondered what bad luck she had mustered that was now forcing her to compete against Han Sen again. Every time she was about to get something, Han Sen was there to ruin things for her. Her wounds still hadn't healed from their first encounter, and she was deprived of quite a bit of her power. She wouldn't be able to break through the limitations of Demon Grave, and so, seeing Han Sen strike harder and harder, she knew she was getting suppressed. She wasn't being given a moment to do anything about it. She did not know why, but Isha felt as if Han Sen's sword skills had improved. He was stronger than he had been in their last fight. It made the current fight much harder. It wasn't because Han Sen's sword skills had improved, though. It was because Han Sen had learned some of the teeth knife techniques from the knife mind, and Han Sen was a beginner in teeth powers now. So, Han Sen now understood how teeth knife worked. He wouldn't be any worse than Isha right now. Han Sen was suppressing Isha quite easily. If Isha had abandoned teeth knife and used other skills, even less powerful skills, Han Sen wouldn't have managed to suppress her so fully. Seeing that Isha was going to get hit with the scabbard, a splash came from the pool of liquid. In that circular pool, the milky liquid blew up like an erupting volcano. The white juice lashed across the area in waves. Han Sen and Isha were both given a shock. They both retreated, wanting to dodge the white liquid. The white liquid was sprayed across the floor, and then they realized that the pool had dried up. There wasn't a single drop of the liquid left in there. The pipes that sent the white liquid to the pool were now dry. There was no more of the white liquid flowing through. The pool was empty. Why is there nothing? Where are the origins of the xenogeneics researched by the crystallizers? Isha's face changed. It looked as if she could not accept what she was seeing.
Han Sen felt strange.
The ball had just rolled inside, too. So why was it gone? Han Sen did not have the time to think this over, though. He swung the scabbard and tried to finish off Isha. As Han Sen moved, he noticed Isha's face looked glum. The white liquid was approaching them as if it were alive. It was a sight that was very familiar to the two of them. Things like that had turned Roxfall Duke and Vic into xenogeneics. It had only taken one of the dangerous white columns to transform Roxfall Duke and Vic, but here there were many. There had to be 1,000 of the wriggling white things. They were like a horde of monsters, surrounding Han Sen and Isha. Dollar, I will remember you. Do not let me see you outside of Demon Grave. I wouldn't be the Knife Queen if I couldn't kill you quickly in the normal world, Isha said, before trying to escape. Don't leave yet. If you like me so much, why don't you just stay? Han Sen laughed and slashed forward to block her way. Han Sen kept attacking her nonstop. Isha had used up too much energy, so she couldn't fight Han Senator Plus. She didn't want to fight. The white liquid was getting so close, and touching a single drop would be enough to end you. Xenogeneics themselves weren't scary. What was scary was becoming one yourself, especially if you became a mindless killing machine in the process. Why are you still coming after me? If we don't leave, we will both become one of those mindless xenogeneics. Do you want to die with me that much? Isha pleaded as much as she was able to as she continued to dodge. Isn't it quite romantic to live and die together? Han Sen's sword skills came at her even faster. He had decided to kill Isha here. Since she was half deified, she could kill Han Sen with the greatest of ease if she managed to get out. He was just a baron, after all. So, obviously, he did not want any of that to happen. He had to make sure Isha did not escape Demon Grave. Han Sen was not worried about the white liquid, either. The liquid itself did not seem interested in Han Senator, so he was not worried. Glancing over their shoulders, Han Sen and Isha noticed the wriggling white things racing for them. There was a slight difference this time, though. Han Sen could tell they were going for Isha, and so he stood near her to make it look like the white things were coming after him too. Isha did not yet know Han Sen had no reason to be afraid, and with Han Sen disrupting her, she felt angry and afraid herself. The white juice was coming. Dollar, I am going to kill you. Isha could not escape from Han Sen, so now she was furious. Her white bunny ears stood up tall and straight, and her long hair waved. Her entire body wrapped itself up in a purple flame. She broke the rules again, as her power increased by several multiples. She tried to strike Han Sen with her hands, as purple sword flames blazed. Han Sen kept moving, trying to dodge that flame. The purple flame wrapped Isha up, though, and she managed to disappear and reappear in front of the sphere's entrance. That made Han Sen depressed. He hadn't realized that he'd made Isha angry enough to cast the skill. This time, it was too much for her, though. Her body was damaged. Even if she left Demon Grave, her body would be weak for a very long time to come. Han Sen wanted to give chase, but he suddenly felt as if someone had patted his shoulder. Goosebumps flared across his skin. Han Sen ran forward and looked back. There was nothing behind him. When he looked at his shoulder, he saw nothing there. He felt as if something was sitting there, but he just couldn't see it. Suddenly, the colors on Han Sen's shoulder became blurry. He saw that a creature, like a chameleon, had just appeared. And then, the colors began to shift again. The The creature was blending back into its environment. Even at such a close distance, Han Sen couldn't see it anymore. Surely it can't have come out of that weird ball, Han Sen thought. Although the little creature had only just appeared, it looked like a straight-up monster. It was simply small, that was all. It was around the size of a man's hand. And now, Han Sen had an answer for why the ball was no longer in the pool. The creature could change color to avoid being seen. The little thing's color changed again. It went to his right shoulder, changed color, and disappeared again. That is so powerful. It is practically invisible, Han Sen thought, as he watched the little thing change its colors. It was so close to him, and yet, Han Sen could not see it at all. Did you come out of the ball?
Han Sen asked.
He wasn't sure if the creature could hear him, but it seemed as if it did. It revealed itself, nodded, and then disappeared again. Han Sen was no longer worried. It was certainly not a hostile creature. So, he went ahead and exited the circular chamber. Oh no! Han Sen noticed that both Isha and Hawk Wing, whom he had knocked out, were gone. The cocoon had apparently risen into the air again, and there were many paths to the outside available. The whole cocoon was glowing. Han Sen would have liked to leave the same way he had entered, but the white liquid under the bridge had started to rage. It was like a fountain, hosing the entirety of the cocoon. A hole appeared in the top of the cocoon, and a white pillar suddenly descended through it. It caught Han Sen's body and pushed him back through the air, heading downwards out of the cocoon. When he exited, the group of monsters came running towards Han Senator. They surrounded him. The little monster walked directly before Han Sen and looked at him. The little thing on Han Sen's shoulder revealed itself before jumping into the little monster's hands. The little monster was so happy as it held the little creature up to the sky. It roared. The group of monsters also roared alongside him. It was like a cult, all singing praise. Not long after, the noise quietened and silence returned. The little monster commanded another monster to collect Han Senator. Han Sen understood how they worked now, so he decided to hop on top of the monster. He had realized by now that he wouldn't be able to find Isha and Hawkwing. Han Sen was glad that he had managed to loot Hawkwing's body while he was unconscious, though. He hadn't lost too much when Hawkwing had run off. But Han Sen did not know if the items he had retrieved were worth it. He'd inspect them all and come to a conclusion later. The monster started walking back, but they weren't sending Han Sen to the chaos. They actually went deeper into the desert. Hey, where are you taking me?
Han Sen's heart sank.
All he wanted to do right about now was leave. The possibility of Isha finding him outside of Demon Grave was no laughing matter. The monsters ignored his question. They ran for a whole day through the desert until they reached an oasis. The oasis was even bigger than the one where the chaos lived. The fruit there were in abundance, and every vine held clusters of the fruit. The monster put him down, and then the little monster pointed at the fruit and pointed at Han Sen. Are you saying these fruits are mine, and I can take whatever I want? Han Sen was so happy. Han Sen saw a xenogenic fruit amidst the rest, and he realized there must have been many of them there. If he could take as much as he wanted to, he could receive a lot. The little monster nodded, and so Han Sen picked up an apple that looked like a diamond. He also took a banana that looked like yellow jade. There was even a ruby dragon fruit. Seeing Han Sen grab so many in such a short time, the monster was given a cold sweat. He bit Han Sen by the armor and pulled him to another area. Why are you bringing me to this well? I'm not thirsty. Let me take some more. Han Sen was carrying a sack full of xenogenic fruit. He sounded so greedy. The little monster's eyelids twitched right before he pushed Han Sen into the well. It's fine if you don't want me to take any more, but you didn't have to push me into this well. Han Sen felt depressed, finding his body in the water. Fortunately, the little monster had only pushed him and not hurt him. Han Sen started to swim out, but he then noticed something odd. The well had vanished, and he was now in a lake nestled between two mountains. What is this place? And why am I here? Han Sen was shocked as he looked up at the sky. It was nighttime, and there were two moons in the sky. Han Sen now realized he was back on planet Kate. I did not know Demon Grave had a teleporter. Those guys were pretty nice. Han Sen was so happy. He no longer had to worry about Isha ambushing him when he exited Demon Grave. Being nice always gives me a reward. Let me eat some fruit to celebrate. Han Sen opened the sack and was quickly given a shock. The chameleon was sitting in the middle of all the fruit, and Han Sen hadn't a clue when the little creature had managed to sneak inside.
D astérisque MN.
You sneaked out? Han Sen asked as he picked the thing up. The little thing did not reply. It simply changed its color and disappeared. Far away, in the middle of the desert and demon grave, a bunch of monsters were roaring. It was as if that noise was going to sunder the skies. I can't send you back now. I can't go back to Demon Grave. If you have no qualm with that, then you can come with me. But what should I name you? Han Sen receded into thought. After a lengthy amount of time passed, he said, How about I call you Sicko? That name is cool. The transparent thing suddenly became red, and spikes covered its skin. Its nose was breathing faster than usual. You don't like it? Let's think of another name then. Little homie thing. How about Mr. Chameleon? Horny demon? Horny wolf? Horny dragon? Transformer? Xenogenic gene consumed. Baron Geno point +1. Han Sen cooked a few of the bananas over a fire. As they cooked, the bananas quickly softened from their previous crystal-like state. Each banana increased 1 Baron gene. Before he had finished eating them all, he reached 100 Baron genes. Baron Geno points at max point collection can no longer continue. The Geno body requires a special fruit. Han Sen ate another banana, and the same announcement played. In the sanctuaries, when your Geno points maxed out, you could evolve via the evolution pools. In the Geno universe, things didn't behave like that. He had no clue how to break through and ascend. Does this mean I have to initiate the breakthrough myself? Han Sen kept thinking, but this was the only possibility that came to mind. It was pointless to keep eating the same Geno fruit, so he packed it up and went back to the sanctuary. When Xie Qing King saw Han Sen, he ran up to him, pounding his puffed-up chest. Old Han, I can generate Geno armor. Take me to the Geno universe, and I will use my handsome body and awesome comics to conquer that place. Me too, little angel said calmly. Me too, came Zero's soft voice. Me too. Me too. Many people kept saying they were done and ready to go. If Luolan and Ji Yanran reached that level, they'd probably want to go, as well. Especially so, with the prospect of searching for Little Flower. Stop. Stop. What do you guys think that place is? It's not like moving to a new house. You might die out there. At least give me some more time to prepare a nice, safe place for you to settle into. Little Silver, you can ascend and come to the Geno universe, too. Han Sen went back to Planet Kate, now having to think about a serious matter. Because he had brought back many xenogenic genes, many of his people could generate their Geno armor. A lot of them were dying to come, and he knew it'd be impossible to stop them forever. This was especially true for Xie Qing King and Gu Qingqing. They would undoubtedly try something stupid if Han Sen did not bring them soon. I need to find a safe place to build a base for us. If I do that, they can come. But where can I find such a safe place? Han Sen took Little Invisible toward one of the nearby cities. After 2 days of travel, they reached it. Little Invisible was the chameleon's new name. The creature seemed happy with it. Fortunately, there was no fighting going on in that city. It was still under the full control of the people of Kate. There, Han Sen was able to buy a phone with which he could contact Xiao and Lan Se. Xiao told Han Sen that Grand City had fallen and that they had joined 7 Mirrors. They were on a ship headed there. She told Han Sen to come to her, because he could join the land reclamation operations instead of just fighting all the time. Han Sen thought the idea wasn't too bad. If he could find a place without higher races running around and hunting down xenogenics, that would be perfect for his companions to get their foot in the door and grow. But the city he was in did not have a ship heading for 7 Mirrors. He couldn't go. On the streets of Mississippi City, everyone was hurriedly minding their own business. No one really concerned themselves with others. The place hadn't been invaded by the tourists yet, but the people knew that it was only a matter of time before it happened. Planet Kate was in freefall, and everyone had to think about where their future would lead and what they could do. Many ships there were still transporting refugees into space. The crowds were huge, and they could not all fit. Most of them would have to wait for some time before they could make it off the planet. On that miserable street, There was someone who didn't quite look like the rest of those dreary people. The man was walking down the street without armor. He wore clothing made of real cloth, and he also held a small banner in his hands. There were some strange words written across it, but it was not of a common language. Han Sen, however, would have recognized them if he had seen them. While the man was walking, a tall woman with white bunny ears approached him. She was wearing a mask. She pulled out a knife and placed the blade against the man's neck. People continued walking by, and the man and woman were suddenly covered by a strange power. It isolated them on the busy street, making it seem like they weren't there at all. "My queen, what do you want?" The man was not afraid of having a drawn knife against his neck. He looked at the woman with surprise, though. That woman was the knife queen of the rebate. It was Isha, whom Han Sen had almost killed. Isha looked at the man with cold eyes and said, "Do you want to live, or do you want to die?" "I haven't lived enough, so yeah, I want to live." The man laughed. "If you want to live, give me a reading," Isha said coldly. The man looked at Isha, smiled, and said, "My queen, might I ask if my previous prediction was accurate?" "Huh." Isha hummed and did not answer the man. She went on to say, "Predict my future and that of the man named Dollar. He who is a human." Isha had been waiting outside Demon Grave for a very long time. Even after a storm started on the inside, Dollar still hadn't come to the exit point. She did not believe Dollar would find himself trapped in Demon Grave for any long stretch of time, but she had tried everything in search of him. She just couldn't locate the man. So, she had come here to ask the man for help in finding the elusive Dollar. You will meet him when fate decides your paths will intertwine. For now, you should let it go. The man smiled. "I don't believe that. Find him for me, unless you want to die," Isha said angrily. The man gave a wry smile as he shook his head. "My queen, you are being stubborn. If you do not believe in fates, then why do you wish to hear what I can predict?" Isha frowned. She did not want to believe what the man was telling her, but she had already received a reading from him before she went to Demon Grave. The reading had turned out to be truthful, so she felt strangely compelled by what he told her. Although she did not want to believe that this man could foresee the future and perceives destinies, she did. "I am asking you if you'll do it or not." Isha coldly looked at him, with the knife still raised to his neck. "Of course, but you cannot challenge fate. Even if I did know where he was, you couldn't meet him, and then you would blame me for not being accurate." The man sighed. "Are you saying you won't do it?" Isha looked as if she was ready to slash. "You can't challenge fate. You cannot force me. Everyone here has their own destiny. Their lives are small, but not even God can change the roads they follow. They cannot be made a queen like you." "But I am just a clairvoyant," the man said. "Who says you cannot challenge and change fate? If I wanted to, I could make even an ant into a giant beast," Isha said coldly. The man smiled and said, "If you have such confidence, how about we make a bet?" "What bet?" Isha asked expressionlessly. "I will pick someone whose life is comparable to an ant, and if you can make him challenge his fate by gaining independence from you and becoming a duke, then I lose. I will find the person that you want me to find." "How does that sound?" the man said seriously. "What if I accomplish the task and you fail to find the man that I want?" Isha said with confidence. "If I cannot deliver this man to you directly, then my head is yours to remove. If you want it, you can just tell me. You don't have to get your hands dirty if you don't want to." The man looked serious, and it didn't look as if he was joking. "Okay, who said an ant's fate is fixed? Even if he is just a dumb guy with Geno armor, I'll make him a duke in 3 years," Isha agreed. She really hated Dollar. She wanted to kill him, but she had been unable to find him, so using this fortune teller might be her best option. Raising a duke was not difficult. She did not think it would be a trying task, and she didn't believe in fate. Not many people are truly talented. Most of them are ants by default. So, just go ahead and pick anyone. The man randomly pointed. "What about him? If you don't think he is suitable, pick another. They are all ants." "No, it's fine. I'll choose him then, just in case you would later find fault with my selection." Isha looked at the person the man pointed at as she spoke coldly. "I am quite famous and known by many races. There is no chance of escaping this bet you, however, are trying to challenge your own fate. I must warn you to be careful." The man smiled. "In 3 years, I will come looking for you. If you are unable to find him, don't blame me for what happens." Isha walked up to the person that had been pointed out to her. The person on the street had no clue what was going on, but he was suddenly pulled in by a weird power, and then he disappeared completely. Isha took the man and left. Her power vanished with her, and when the fortune teller appeared again, the Kate behind him almost walked into him. When he saw Isha disappear, he smiled strangely. He continued walking, carrying his small banner. If Han Sen had seen the banner, he would have understood the words. They read, "Calculating destiny in the human language." The man disappeared into the crowds. He did not look strange. He was a drop of water in the midst of the throng of people. Han Sen walked down a street filled with people, thinking about how he might get to 7 mirrors. Planet Kate had almost fallen completely, and when it did, the tourists would rule it. Han Sen couldn't live there much longer, and he knew he would have to leave soon. But he couldn't get on the ship as there were already too many people trying to get off the planet. If he showed he was a noble, he could probably board a ship immediately without the need to queue. But Han Sen wouldn't do that. If he did, Isha might find him. And if she did, that would be bad. After leaving Demon Grave, Han Sen knew he didn't stand a chance against a deified elite. They could kill him with the greatest of ease. Walking down the street, Han Sen was thinking about how he might get to 7 mirrors so he could find Xiao and Lan Se. As he walked, he suddenly felt cold, like a shadow had fallen over him. He was wrapped up by a strange power and lifted off the ground. Han Sen was shocked and unsure of what was going on. He had no clue why he had been suddenly trapped. Han Sen was trying to think about who he might have made angry this time. Isha? Hawkwing?
Mysterie?
The Taurus? Some surviving feathers? Han Sen had offended a lot of people by this point, but none of them should have known he was Dollar. Did someone find out I am Dollar? I cannot be that unlucky. Han Sen felt depressed, and he kept thinking, I cannot fight back against power like this. They must be a duke. I wonder if I'll be given an opportunity to speak. If I am killed before I can speak, that would suck. I at least need the time to teleport away. Han Sen was wrapped up by this power. He was snared and unable to move. He couldn't even use his skills, so he was just hoping the person who had done this did not hate him too much. He hoped he still had a chance of surviving. Han Sen might end up getting beaten and tortured before they locked him up. But if that happened, at least he'd be able to return to the sanctuary. As Han Sen was worrying about this, he saw some light. He fell to the ground, which sent pain shooting up through his butt. That was the least of his concerns right now, though. When he looked around, he noticed he was on an aircraft. He was inside a control room, and the black of space was visible through the windows. The ship looked fairly advanced. It did not look like some cheap thing you'd find on Planet Kate. And there was another person in the control room. They had bunny ears, and they were operating the ship. Rebate. There's no way I'm this unlucky. Han Sen's heart jumped. Han Sen looked up and saw a throne perched at the highest point of the deck. On that chair, the first thing Han Sen saw were long legs. They were crossed over each other, and whoever sat like that had to be someone who was very proud and arrogant. Han Sen looked up a little higher, and that was when he saw the white uniform filled with big boobs. Her arms were crossed, and her face was stone cold. Atop this person's head were white bunny ears. Oh no, it's Isha.
Han Sen moa ned.
In front of the Knife Queen, he could not teleport away. Han Sen did not know how she had managed to find him, and he didn't think he had left any trace to follow. But that did not matter right now, as he knew he would soon be dead. Now, he was just hoping that Isha would not kill him right away, so he'd have the chance to escape. It does not matter who you are, but from this point forth, you will be my student in 3 years. I will see to it that you're a duke. Isha looked down at Han Sen like the queen she was. Han Sen looked at her and opened his mouth. He believed himself to be dreaming. Han Sen did not know if Isha had gone crazy, or if he himself had snapped. She wants to take me as a student, what? I thought she hated my guts. I thought she preferred to skin me alive. Why would she take me as a student, pledging to make me a duke in 3 years? Did her mind implode in rage, and this is some strange form of insanity? Or is this all one great, big conspiracy? Will she try and trick me before destroying me? She could destroy me right now, if that is what she wanted to do. But then again, maybe she doesn't know I'm Dollar. Even if she doesn't know, though, why would she find me as a student? Am I getting grossly lucky? Or did Isha simply get kicked in the head by a donkey and randomly picked out a student that just so happened to be me? Han Sen did not understand. He looked at Isha, having not the faintest clue why all of this was happening. Isha was satisfied with the way Han Sen reacted. She could tell Han Sen was in great shock, and she thought that was because he was unable to comprehend why a deified elite would so willingly accept someone so ordinary. Isha was going to take Han Sen as a student, and that was not just a random decision. When the man pointed at Han Sen, Isha recognized him. She recognized Han Sen, but not Dollar. When Kong Fei took a lantern to become known as No, everyone heard about it. The elites around Planet Kate knew that Kong Fei had given 2 deified feathers to 2 crystallizers. Because Isha was headed to Demon Grave, she was near Planet Kate at the time. She too learned about this. She knew Han Sen had 1 deified feather. But Han Sen was just wearing his Geno armor. He wasn't wearing his noble stuff, and he didn't have pure crystallizer blood. Han Sen's genes were complicated, so the elite races had all given their favor to stay up late, who had pure blood. No one had made membership offers to Han Sen due to the risk of raising him. When the man pointed out Han Sen, she didn't think it was purely coincidental. She thought the man was trying to trouble her and make things harder. Developing Han Sen to the ranks of a top champion and refining the deified feather to become semi-deified, that would have been too much to bet. She didn't know if that would even have been possible. But the fortune teller's request had been a strange one. Dukes were not particularly high-level or low-level. The challenge was definitely possible, so she agreed. If Han Sen was an ordinary person, Isha would have just taken him home without even telling him why. But Kong Fei, who was deified, was still out there, and Han Sen had 1 of his deified feathers. So, Isha was willing to take him as a real student. That meant she respected the feather and Kong Fei himself. She wasn't going to invite the trouble of Kong Fei knocking on her door. It was not embarrassing to take a crystallizer on as an acolyte, especially one that had received a feather from Kong Fei. It was lucky that Han Sen had met Kong Fei. If he hadn't, Isha would have treated him very differently. The challenge would be a bit difficult, but she was confident she only had to raise him to the Duke level. Even if he was just a pig, she could still turn him into a Duke in 3 years. It was because of all these reasons that Han Sen was brought back to the HQ of the rebate. It was called Narrow Moon. It was a xenogenic space that was no weaker than Holy Heaven had been. It covered the sky. Han Sen found out that Isha was sincere about taking him on as a student, and there was no ulterior motive for doing so. It was all very strange, yes, but he decided on not returning to the sanctuary just yet. He knew that if he did come back, he'd still be teleported to right where he was, and that would put him in a bad situation, no matter what. I can't be sure what is wrong with her, but all in all, I can only suppose it is a good thing. A semi-deified being wants to train me up to the rank of Duke. Such an internship is hard to find. It's better than her finding me as Dollar, at least. Han Sen decided to accept the situation and just go with it. But she didn't take him as a real student. Everything started with the most basic of routines, and there wasn't even a ceremony to induct him. The Knife Queen taking a student was a very important event for the rebate. Now that she had chosen Han Sen, an outsider, many of the rebate were wondering what she was up to. He wasn't one of them, after all. The Knife Queen had not married or had children. She had never taken a student before, either. So, the presence of this student meant a lot to the rebate. Everyone thought that she would soon become deified. It did not matter that she had no children as of yet, as her lifespan still had many years in it. But the Knife Queen had suddenly taken a student. It made people start to wonder. Many of the rebate nobles and officers wanted to find out why she had accepted this student. They also wished to learn more about who Han Sen was. They eventually found out that Han Sen was an owner of one of the deified feathers. Thus, the people quickly came to the conclusion that the Knife Queen wished to develop a half-deified alongside her. But they worried about Han Sen's talent. He was a non-pure crystallizer, and that meant he was a greater risk than stay up late would be. Knife Queen didn't explain much, and she wasn't going to tell everyone that she had actually taken Han Sen because of a bet. She wasn't concerned about making him truly powerful, and she was serious about only taking him up as high as a duke. Then, it all depended on Han Sen. Knife Queen's palace covered half the planet, and it was a much bigger planet than Planet Roka. Han Sen was told to go to a garden located in the palace. Yes, master. Don't call me master. Just call me queen. Isha looked at Han Senator. She didn't like the first title he had used, as that made her sound old. Okay, my queen.
Han Sen nodded.
Han Sen thought that taking an enemy and raising him was unexpectedly nice of her. It was a respectable deed. Drink this. Isha gave Han Sen a bottle. What is this, my queen? Han Sen asked. It is the Geno fluid from a magnet fruit. It can make your Geno armor evolve. You are currently way too weak. You should focus on becoming a noble first. After that, we can keep going and level you up that way, Isha said. Thank you, my queen. Han Sen's eyes felt wet. She had been really helpful and even given a precious gift to her enemy. Han Sen thought that if she found out he was Dollar, she'd be so angry that she'd most likely stroke out and die. Seeing Han Sen look so grateful, she misunderstood. Her attitude softened, and she went on to say, if you heed what I say and take me for your proper teacher, you will become a duke in 3 years. With some luck, there is a chance you might one day become a king. But as for Han Sen's current condition, Queen didn't say much. And the only reason she said 3 years was due to the instability of Han Sen's body. Otherwise, it would not have taken that long. Anyway, drink this Geno fluid that once belonged to a magnet fruit. And then, practice your Geno arts. Focus on evolving for a second time first. It does not matter whether you become a noble or a xenogeneic. I will take care of you. You will not become a mindless monster. Isha sounded confident. Yes, my queen. Han Sen did not say anything more. He just opened the bottle and drank its contents. He was familiar with the smell, and he had many magnet fruits at home. He was planning to eat one and see if he could evolve. He didn't expect Isha would go to such lengths and provide him with the juice. So, he spared no time in necking it down. When Isha saw Han Sen do it so quickly, she smiled even more. Han Sen chugged the Geno fluid that contained magnet fruit, and then he felt a weird power soar into his limbs, rejuvenating his cells. Han Sen cast the story of genes, and then his spell armor appeared. The Geno fluid had become a raw power that was absorbed by the armor. Isha sat where she was and waited for the result of Han Sen's evolution. If Han Sen became a xenogeneic, and his will was lost to the lust for killing, she could recover his will and sense. After a while, Han Sen's energy started to roll downhill, but still, she hadn't seen Han Sen evolve a second time. How can that happen? Did I bring him the wrong ingredient? Maybe that wasn't the Geno fluid. Isha frowned and sniffed the bottle, and then she went on to think, this is the magnet fruit. Why did he not evolve a second time? Isha saw Han Sen's energy had weakened and become normal again. Han Sen felt depressed about it too. This was his second time trying to evolve using the story of genes, and he had failed this time as well. I am sorry, my queen. I have failed. Han Sen opened his eyes and looked at her apologetically. It's fine. You failed only once. Isha called for a guard to bring her another bottle. Then, she continued by saying, try again. After the first failure, this is sure to succeed. Yes, my queen. I will succeed. Han Sen accepted the second bottle and spared no time in drinking it all. Isha looked fairly unconcerned, but on the inside, it was a different story. She felt awful. Magnet fruit was not something you could buy at a street-side market. They were very expensive, and they were items coveted by many. And it wasn't just commoners either. Even many of the high races, who were unlucky enough to have babies that weren't born nobles, wanted it. So, treasures like magnet fruit could be very expensive to obtain. And there were times when they were completely unavailable for purchase. Even someone like Isha did not have many to her name, and she would have much preferred to save them. Ordinarily, one bottle of such Geno fluid was all that would be needed for success. Failure was abnormally rare. Han Sen downed the second one, and that weird power manifested once more. The power surge was stronger than what he experienced the last time. Such powerful energy. This is far greater than a baron. He must certainly succeed this time. Isha started to feel relieved. After a while, Han Sen's Geno armor showed no sign of responding. It didn't look as if it was going to melt at all. After a while, Han Sen's energy started to dip, and that meant another failure. My queen, I am so sorry. Han Sen felt embarrassed. He didn't know why his spell armor kept on failing. Isha's eyes were twitching, and as she looked at Han Sen, she asked, "What Geno arts have you practiced?" "Let me see." The fact that he had drunk 2 Geno fluids without success led Isha to believe there was a serious problem with him. Han Sen made no effort to hide anything, and he just told her, "I did not write my Geno arts down, but I can show it to you." Isha nodded, and Han Sen read it out slowly. He himself believed there was a problem somewhere, as failure was not something he often experienced. Han Sen could not tell what the problem was, though. Isha, being a semi-deified being, might be the one to help him through the slump. Han Sen only read out a little when Isha's face looked glum. She asked coldly, "Who taught you this?" "No one. I bought it out in the markets. It seemed fairly powerful, so I decided to study it." Han Sen was shocked by the sudden question. She looked as if she knew something about it. In disbelief, Isha said, "You just practiced this random skill on a whim? And you created a Geno armor with it? I am not sure if you are lucky or unlucky, truth be told. Is there a problem with this Geno art?" Han Sen was shocked. Isha said slowly, "It isn't just a problem. But don't you think this skill requires, well, too much skill? If you had a body like this, you'd already be a god. You wouldn't have to practice. Whoever wrote this was conducting a prank with the intent of harming others, and mistakenly, you generated your Geno armor with it. It is impossible to evolve a second time. What do I do then?" Han Sen wondered if this really was a problem associated with the story of genes. When he studied the story of genes, he had acknowledged the problem. He already knew the requirements were absurdly high and demanding. No one could even start off with the basic requirements, and he had to use the black crystal armor to help him get his foot in the door with its practice. Isha frowned. It was obvious that the man had given her a challenge that was harder than she initially thought. Han Sen had already generated his Geno armor, so it was too late for him to change technique now. Aside from humans, not many creatures could practice 2 Geno arts in order to create 2 types of Geno armor. That was because the genes of others were stable, and accomplishing this was outside the realm of possibility. The genes of humans were unstable enough to allow this, but it was still closer to the side that did not allow the fabrication of a second Geno armor. So, Isha did not consider trying to get Han Sen to practice another Geno art and start from scratch. She didn't think it would be possible. Breaking his Geno armor and getting him to rebuild it would be a fruitless endeavor as well. It would permanently damage his body. She could take that risk if he was just an ordinary nobody, but Han Sen had a deified feather. If Kong Fei found out what she had done to him, she might incur his wrath. This Geno art is harmful, but if he can finish learning the basics, there is the chance of it becoming something very strong and beneficial. Han Sen has managed to generate a Geno armor with it already, and aside from deified elites, that shouldn't be possible. And once an elite rises to become deified, their body is locked down. They cannot generate a Geno armor, but this man can. Perhaps there really is a chance. Isha looked at Han Sen as she thought. A Geno art that cannot be practiced, and yet he has managed to generate a Geno armor with it. If he can evolve a second time and become a noble, with that perfect Geno armament, his strength would far exceed that of other nobles. After that, practicing would be much less difficult for him, and he might achieve a great deal. It's just this first step will be really difficult to take. Very hard indeed. Han Sen saw Isha staring at him and noticed that she wasn't saying a word. He thought to himself, "Did I waste too many of her resources? Does she no longer want me? That's fine. Just let me go without killing me, please." Han Sen was overthinking things a little, though. Isha had taken him as a student as part of a wager. And that aside, she was not the sort of person that would give up easily. "Han Sen, let me ask you something. I can force you to be my student, but I want this to be something that you yourself desire. I am happy to accept you, but I won't make you do this if it is against your will. I can give you a job, though, and you won't have to worry about anything," Isha suddenly proposed. Of course I am willing to be here, Han Sen hastily told her. He did not know if she was just testing his resolve or not, so he didn't want to share his true opinion. He spoke with firm confidence. My training will be hard. Not everyone is able to accept this, and if you are my student, you have to keep that flame of resolve stoked and push through the pain, even when it hurts. If you cannot handle the pain of this, I can give you the job of an officer instead. Regardless of what happens, I want you to know that you do not have to worry about anything else in your life. Isha spoke coldly, but she was still staring at Han Sen fondly. I will endure whatever pain comes my way and go as far as I possibly can. I will give up anything and give my everything, as long as you don't give up on me. I won't disappoint you. Han Sen paused for a moment. With a sad look, he went on to tell her, on Mosi Mountain, stay up late and I were the recipients of deified feathers. Those high-level races only wanted stay up late, and they ignored me completely. I want to practice too in order to go further. Please, give me the chance no one else did. If I am given the possibility to reach for the stars, I don't mind dying in the effort. Anything is better than staying still, rotting in place. By the end of his speech, Han Sen felt excited. Even he almost believed what he was telling her. Good. If you have this much courage and sense of purpose, I will give you the opportunity. I will help you go further and make those other fool races regret what they told you. Isha thought Han Sen was speaking from the heart, and she wholeheartedly believed his words. But after this, she still went on to say, remember your own words today. I won't blame you if you give up right now and settle for the comfort of a quiet and good life. But if I spend a lot of resources raising you up, only for you to eventually give up and try to run away, you will pay the ultimate price. Not even a deified elite could save you from the destruction I'll bring down on you. Do you understand me? If I try to run away, my head is yours to remove. Han Sen's answer sounded serious. What Han Sen said, though, was not entirely a lie. The last few sentences were actually quite sincere. Han Sen was not willing to back down. If he did not aim high in the Geno universe, he could not survive. And he couldn't protect his friends and family when they made the jump. He needed to get stronger, so he could get back Golden Growler and Little Flower. There was no way he could back down now. Okay, then, let us continue. Isha could tell Han Sen was sincere and true to his words, and she was very impressed by him. Isha was giving him a chance to leave, because it would be hard to begin what he had started. Merely getting past the first stage would cost a lot. She wanted to find out what sort of character Han Sen had before committing. If Han Sen was weak and impatient, she would rather give up and lose the bet. No one could promise her pursuit with Han Sen would pay off, so she had to learn more and consider things properly. Han Sen's answers and behavior had satisfied her. She was no longer second-guessing herself. She was willing to give this a go. If Isha knew Han Sen just wanted to use up her resources to get through the story of genes, she'd have been very angry. Continue, Isha said. Continue what? Han Sen was shocked and not sure what she was alluding to. Continue eating, of course, Isha said. She waved her hand, and a beautiful rebate brought forth a number of elixirs. Consume them one by one, and cast your Geno arts. Do this as many times as you have to. I will make you a noble, and not even the gods themselves can stop it. Isha raised her head, asserting her feeling of confidence. Yes, I won't disappoint you. I will start consuming them now. Immediately after saying that, Han Sen gulped down the contents of the first bottle. Isha sat on a chair, watching Han Sen gather up power to evolve a second time. She looked at him emotionlessly, as if she was made of ice. But her eyes twitched sometimes, showing that she was not all that calm. Her heart was bleeding. After their discussion, Han Sen had used another 3 magnet fruit elixirs, 2 thunder Geno fluids, 2 reborn Geno fluids, 1 fire and ice Geno fluid, and 1 beast blood Geno fluid. They were all the treasures that could force someone to evolve a second time. Normally, one would be enough to accomplish this. But Han Sen had almost emptied her entire treasury by this point, and he hadn't evolved a second time. To Knife Queen, that might have been nothing. But they belonged to the One, and she couldn't just take whatever she pleased whenever she wanted. These were her private items. She was rich, but these items were priceless. They couldn't be bought with money, and Han Sen had yet to evolve a second time. It made Isha start to feel quite ill. "I am sorry, but it looks like I have failed again."
Han Sen stood up.
With this latest failure, he had failed 11 times. "Continue," Isha said emotionlessly. Her eyes twitched another couple of times, though. She only had one boiling geno fluid left to give, and a cell geno fluid. If those two didn't work, her current investments would have all been for nothing. She wouldn't know how to deal with him after she went gone through these. She couldn't just let Han Sen go after investing so much in him with no return. If this were to continue, she'd have to pay a big price to gain an item that would instigate the evolution she wanted to see. And that was something that she really didn't want to do. Han Sen grabbed another geno fluid and drank it. Then, he cast the story of genes. The spell armor was brimming with energy, and it thumped with boundless strength. And then, all of a sudden, a strange power lit up the armor. It made Isha's heart jump. All the other symbols and etchings began to light up, too. Not long after, the geno armor was covered in those symbols and scrawls, making it look like a rippling flame. Isha was so happy to see this, and she said, "It's going to succeed this time." 12 vials of geno fluid was an investment of Goliath proportions. She felt grand relief seeing this. If the final 2 fluids did not help, she wasn't sure if she would have been willing to dip her hands into the ones owned by the entire tribe. Amidst the flame-like symbols, the geno armor started to melt. It melted into a liquid that then took on another form. Seeing Han Sen become a noble and not a xenogeneic was a great thing, too. If he became a xenogeneic, things might have been even harder. Isha looked at the geno armor's shape, trying to figure out what sort of geno armament he was set to receive. A geno art that required so much was sure to yield a fascinating result. The geno fluid kept swirling and changing, and eventually, it started to become transparent, but Isha's face started to turn, too. It looked perplexed. Most armors would evolve to create something that was obviously a weapon. You might even find items or enhancements to the armor itself. But the geno armament that Han Sen created looked very strange. It was not finished, but you could start to make out its shape. It was a crystallizer kid, complete with limbs and a face. Is that a doll geno armament? Isha was thinking to herself, but when the armament had almost finished, Isha started to look shocked. In the air, after the geno armor melted, the geno armament appeared. It looked so weird. It looked like a 12-year-old girl. Her long black hair reached down to her feet, and her eyes were black, also. Her skin was white and smooth, like that of a real human. Some parts of her were wrapped up in white armor, and in her hands, she was holding 2 revolvers. There were names etched into the grips of both guns. Isha thought it was the language of the crystallizers, so she wasn't able to read the words. The girl moved her eyes and crouched down against the floor. She lifted her guns and pointed them at Isha, as if she was guarding Han Sen from a hostile. Isha's eyes opened wide as she stared at the girl. She had seen many geno armaments, but nothing like this. This one looked alive. She had a proper life force. She also looked like she had intelligence, too. For a geno armament to have life like that, and to have armor and guns, her knowledge on what was possible when it came to evolving was wholly flipped on its head. When the geno armament finished generating, Han Sen looked at the girl and said, "Why is my armament a woman? Is that really my geno armament?" The grips convinced Han Sen that this really was his geno armament, though. On the grip of the 2 pearl-white revolvers, the letters SPE were carved into one, and the letters 2 were carved on the other. Together, they formed spell. And that was the name of his geno armor. When Han Sen used his mind, the woman came towards him. When they bumped into each other, she became a white armor set that covered his entire body. The word spell was written all across it. An incredible power filled Han Sen's body now. It gave him much more power than the geno armor ever did. "This is my geno armament." Han Sen was shocked. He went to check on its information, and the geno body said he had become a duke behind the word spell. "My queen, I think I succeeded," Han Sen said, looking at Isha. "Very good. Now keep practicing." Isha was still in shock, and she was roused from a slumber of deep thoughts by Han Sen's sudden shout. Isha had never heard of a geno armament like this. Maybe this guy really can achieve something special. A geno armament like this is strange, Isha thought to herself. Isha allowed Han Sen to write down the content of the story of genes so she could look over it. She wanted to help Han Sen learn and modify the later parts to facilitate his practice. Because the practice method was so demanding, if no changes were made, it would be much harder to level up and ascend. It would be even harder to generate geno-armaments. He would need to be a god to practice it in its entirety. After the changes, the power would be decreased, but if it weren't edited, then it couldn't be learned at all. This thing was not created for the average Joe to fool around with. Because modifying took a long time, she allowed Han Sen to continue practicing for now. And when she was done, they would begin anew. Han Sen returned to his garden and summoned Spell. He wanted to know what powers she possessed. He was mostly interested in the 2 revolvers she wielded, and he wanted to know if the guns could fire bullets. Spell moved by her own volition. She did so with gentle grace, and as she clutched the 2 revolvers, she was able to fly around effortlessly and shoot the flowers all about. The revolvers could fire bullets and hit the flowers. Her accuracy was good, but Han Sen noticed that the bullets weren't solid, and they cost energy to fire. Even Han Sen's own energy was drained by the attacks. Spell was Han Sen's geno-armament, so it made sense that it could be used as a weapon. But he also realized the more power he was willing to put in, the more powerful the bullets fired would be. Those bullets did not have any special powers, though. Perhaps it was because he was too low-level. Becoming a Viscount might change things. Barons couldn't unleash powers from a distance. They had no ranged attacks they could use, so at least where barons were concerned, having Spell was something that was a little overpowered. Han Sen tested it quite a bit, and he realized he could command and control Spell in battle. Her movements were controlled by Han Sen's thoughts. There was no delay, despite the distance that separated them. Han Sen did not need to control her all the time, though. With just a thought, Spell could be put to any task, and she'd finish it by herself. She was like a living thing, for the most part, and she possessed a lot of intelligence. She's like a real life form. Gee, that the story of genes is strange, Han Sen thought to himself. He really liked Spell, and valued it far above something like a sword or whatever else he might have gotten. He could do a lot more with this. Aside from Isha, though, no one else had learned that he had a geno-armament. The news about Isha using 12 geno-fluids to make Han Sen a geno-armament did circulate, though. All the rebate that heard this could not believe their ears. No matter how bad the creature was, 1 or 2 geno-fluids should have made them noble. And Han Sen had taken 12. How bad was he? Many of the high-class rebates believed raising Han Sen was pointless. If it was so difficult for him to generate a geno-armament, becoming a king and refining the feather would be so much harder. Don't bother raising a talentless person like that. No wonder those elites did not invite Han Sen to join them. He is way too bad. I don't know what Queen was thinking, using 12 geno-fluids. Even if he does have a deified feather, there is such a low chance he can become deified. How much is it going to cost to get him to that level? The resources she wasted could have made 2 semi-deified warriors. All of the rebate were talking about this. Some ministers and elites had already come to consult with Isha, informing her that she should give up on Han Sen now. Isha did not explain her reasoning, and neither did she take their advice. And she said that when the narrow moon tunnel opened up, Han Sen would be a part of it. After that, the rebate communities exploded with talk of Han Sen and Isha. 12 geno-fluids to become a noble baron. Already it was seen as a pointless idea, but Isha felt differently. She still wanted to raise Han Sen up. She even wanted to give him a name for the tunnel. It was hard to take the minds of others off of this idea. Many of the elites thought that Isha raising an outsider and taking him as a student meant they had some sort of secret relationship. Isha hadn't even performed a ceremony when she accepted him as a student. With the sudden induction, they all believed she knew how bad he was, but she was forging ahead anyway. Otherwise, why would the queen accept a student so quietly? No one was willing to challenge Isha's desires, though. But even so, everyone was determined to continue hating Han Sen. Han Sen stayed in the garden to practice with Spell. He had no idea people were talking about him the way they were. Even if he had known, though, he wouldn't have cared. Han Sen might have looked young, but he had gone through life and death experiences few others could equal. He had experienced everything a person could, a long time ago. He He was not totally uncaring, but he wouldn't waste many feelings on petty quarrels either. Isha summoned him and told him to practice in Narrow Moon. If he went, that would be the first time he had exited the garden. Before you go to Narrow Moon, I will teach you a knife skill. Try to learn as much of this as you can. When she said that to Han Sen, her voice sounded strange. Han Sen didn't notice, though. He didn't realize how many talented young rebates were waiting in Narrow Moon to teach him a lesson. Narrow Moon's space tunnel opened once a year, and only barons could enter. Only 10 of them could go at a time. Only the best barons would be there. As a result, to claim a spot, you had to be an approved and formally recognized genius. And you also had to have proof to support any claim of excellence. In addition, you had to receive an invite from an elder. Han Sen had nothing, and yet, Isha had claimed a spot there for him. People weren't very happy about that, and the young men who had claimed the other 9 places didn't like him at all. Some of the young ones were preparing to teach him a lesson inside the tunnel, because when Han Sen got bullied in there, Isha wouldn't be able to do anything to save him. Han Sen stood in the garden, watching the many planets clustered in the sky. The evening sky was like the image seen inside a kaleidoscope. The xenogenic space twisted the dimensions strangely, so that Han Sen could even see buildings on the surface of the closest planets. Many of the planets were of good size. If it wasn't for the xenogenic space, the planets would have collided with each other and annihilated everything within range. But under that xenogenic space, the planets were fine. They had their own orbits, and they were quite organized. Looking up in any direction from Narrow Moon, you'd see many planets clustered together. There were circular ones, but also broken ones. Some of them were close, some of them were far. Their numbers were countless, and that was why it was called Narrow Moon. The planets around Narrow Moon were very mysterious. There were 3 planets, the names of which were Tianmin, Tianyue, and Tianji. Every year, when those 3 planets formed a triangular constellation, the center space would reveal a tunnel. And this was why Narrow Moon was so mysterious. Only Baron-class beings could enter. If you were too powerful, the energy inside would crush you, and you would die. The tunnel would allow 10 entrants. There were 10 open spots for beings to join, and 1 spot would be occupied and taken away after each entrant. Isha had allocated 1 spot for Han Sen to enter. Whether or not a benefit could be earned was entirely down to Han Sen. Han Sen, you are my student. I helped you become a noble, and I grabbed you a spot to go to Narrow Moon. But from now on, if you want more help from me, you have to prove to me you are worth the investment. Otherwise, despite the fact you will still be my student, further chances for special treatment will be void, Isha said seriously. I will work hard.
Han Sen nodded.
No, you need to work like your life depends on it, Isha frowned.
Yes. Han Sen shouted.
Now that she was satisfied, she chucked Han Sen a knife. The space tunnel is going to open soon. It is too late to teach you knife skills, but I can teach you this one. If you learn this, it should help. It is called Tusk. Isha held a knife, and still talking to Han Sen, she told him, watch. I will only show you this once. After that, Isha drew her knife. She drew it very quickly and brought it right up to Han Sen's face with blistering speed. And then, Isha stopped the motion without hurting him. Han Sen, seeing her strike, knew that what he had seen was from the opening of Teeth Knife. Han Sen had seen it acted out by the Knife Mind entity. He had already learned it at the time with the Knife Mind. And while he had only learned the beginning, he was a master of what he knew. Isha explained Tusk to Han Sen and asked if he understood. If he didn't, and he had a question, she would answer, I understand. Han Sen did not have anything to ask her. After he received the Teeth Knife Mind, he understood it a whole lot more. All he needed was practice. Isha frowned and did not say anything. She left Han Sen to practice it. She wondered why Han Sen did not ask any questions. And she thought he might have just been pretending that he understood the technique. If he was, that was not a very good student to have. Plus, she was the queen, and she was a busy person. While she did take time to teach Han Sen, it'd be stupid if he did not cherish what she took the time to teach him. But Isha did not think he was too bad, overall. If he didn't suffer a little, at least, he wouldn't cherish anything that came to him easily. So, she knew there might be trouble when he went through the space tunnel. She didn't have much to say about the matter, and she was willing to accept the possibility he might fail. Isha thought failing was no big deal. If Han Sen worked hard, it would still be worth it. Han Sen went back to his garden and practiced tusk. He was planning on using this for combat. Han Sen knew many skills, but in case she found out his true identity, it was best not to use it. Only barons were going there. Anyway, Han Sen figured he'd be going with a bunch of snot-nosed kids of the rebate. If they stirred up something, one skill would be enough to lay waste to them. A few days passed quickly. Isha did not take Han Sen to the space tunnel, and he allowed a rebate to guide him there. Narrow Moon had 11 stars. Aside from one of those stars, all of them were kings. Knife Queen Isha was a half-deified king, and there was only one other on par with her. That was Moonwheel King. The rebate had possessed many deified elites at one point, but that was long ago. There were none amongst them right now. Most of the higher races were like the rebate and tended to only have one deified elite. They were the ones who would light the lantern on the race's behalf. But even they would not live forever, and they too would die someday. But without deified elites, the lesser races were still unable to usurp a lantern and claim it for themselves. Typically, they'd need deified elites of their own to manage such a feat. It was very hard for the higher races to create a deified elite. So, even across the space of 1,000 years, witnessing a fight like the one with Kong Fei was extremely rare. Out of the 10 kings of the rebate, Knife Queen was widely regarded as the cream of the crop. Aside from Moonwheel King, who was near enough the same level, the others were far inferior. Isha kept practicing, hoping she'd become deified. So, she did not care too much for the business of the tribe as a whole. Only barons could enter this competition, and so, the higher-tier people wouldn't care too much about it, either. Han Sen did not know about Narrow Moon, and so it was a guard who had to lead him there. The other 9 went there without an escort. When Han Sen arrived, the other 9 were already there. They looked surprised that Han Sen had a guard to guide him. Han Sen looked at the 9 of them, and he was surprised to see they weren't all rebate. Amongst the 9, 3 of them were of a different race. It seemed the rebate had alliances with other races. No one made an effort to speak with Han Sen, but he didn't mind that at all. He felt far freer that way. Not long after, the 3 planets positioned themselves like a triangle. In the center between them, a vortex manifested. It looked like a black hole. The rebate had people guide Han Sen into the vortex. When a white light began to beam from the vortex, barons could enter one at a time. Han Sen was put in last place, and seeing that 9 of the barons had already entered, he did not hesitate to go in. As soon as the white light flashed again, he leaped inside. After Han Sen traveled through the wormhole, he found himself on a planet of sorts. He raised his head to the sky and noticed he was unable to see stars or moons. This wasn't Narrow Moon. He was on a lone planet in the galaxy. This planet was different from other planets. There were just plain fields stretching out until volcanoes rose out of the earth in the distance. Each volcano was dozens of miles away, and there were no mountains, not even the slightest hill. As Han Sen looked around him, he heard a big boom noise come from the closest volcano. It sounded like a roar, and it spat out a pillar of light. It wasn't just the nearest volcano that was erupting either. It was every volcano he could see. With all those pillars shooting into the sky, it was a sight to behold. But Han Sen knew something was wrong. When the volcanoes erupted, there was no rising ash cloud or seeping lava. The column of light just shot up into the clouds and made them bright. They covered the entire sky. The volcanoes only erupted for a minute before stopping. Then, there were no pillars to be seen. But in the sky, the clouds were still getting brighter and brighter. They started to empty, unleashing a torrent of rain from above. And when the rain drew near, Han Sen could tell something was really wrong. It wasn't just water he was seeing. The rain was a bevy of knives. There were short knives, long knives, narrow knives, big and black knives, wing knives, flying knives. All those different types of knives were falling from the sky until they hit the ground, covering the land in their abundance. Han Sen was shocked. There was nowhere to hide or take shelter amidst the knife rain. The best he could do was block. Han Sen did not have a weapon. He had wanted to bring a knife with him so he could use tusk, but Isha said there was no need to. Now he understood why. This place had nothing but knives. Seeing that the knife rain would soon reach him, Han Sen grabbed one out of the air right before slashing the volleys away. The knife rain only lasted a few seconds. Han Sen blocked all the knives assaulting him, and when he looked around, all he could see were knives for miles around. It was something of a knife treasury. The knives were real, too, not illusions. Han Sen picked up a wing knife and a big black knife. One of them had been made from steel, and the other had been made out of some other metal. They felt good to wield, and as Han Sen used them to block the last of the falling knives, he could see marks left on the blades by the repeated collisions. The weaponry was real. Han Sen lowered his head and searched for a better one. Don't search. This is just the first round, so their quality will be bad. If you want a good one, you're going to have to wait for the 7th round. Assuming you last that long, that is.
Arrebate man approachade Han Sen, speaking coldly.
Han Sen looked at him. He looked quite handsome, and he had black bunny ears. He was holding a knife that was shaped like an arrow. He must have picked it up from the rain, as well. What's your name? Han Sen asked the rebate man. Black Steel, son of Black Moon King. The man stared at Han Sen, going on to say, 2 years ago, I begged my father to meet with Knife Queen. I hoped she would accept me as a student, but I was rejected. Han Sen, hearing him say this, knew he was not a friendly chap. Trouble was coming. Black Steel, holding his knife, continued walking toward Han Sr. The Queen took you as a student, but others have a tendency to say you are incredibly weak. I do not believe Queen would be so foolish as to accept one like that. You have to be superior, in some capacity. So, show me what you got. After that, Black Steel's knife came at Han Sen swinging. It thrashed towards him like lightning. Black Steel's knife was not a teeth knife. His skills were very aggressive, though. The narrow knife might have looked ordinary, but it moved as if it could slay an entire army. Han Sen's hand swung the winged knife. It looked like he was slashing, but he wasn't. It looked like he was stabbing, but he wasn't. It looked very creepy as it approached Black Steel's neck. Black Steel swung his narrow knife, and they both collided with each other. The two knives were broken. I did not expect you to have learned Queen's teeth knife. Great. Black Steel's eyes looked on in excitement. He picked up a random knife from the ground and tried swinging it at Han Sen again. Han Sen still had his thick black knife, and he used it to employ tusk. The quality of the blade was bad, so it broke. They were both fighting amidst the knife rain. When a knife broke, they'd pick up another. Broken utensils were scattered all about. Black Steel was not losing, but he looked ill. Han Sen only used tusk, and he did not change up his tactics at all. But that simple skill still kept him in the fight with Black Steel, and he was not losing. To Black Steel, this entire fight was turning into something humiliating. He met Han Sen's eyes and said, "Is that all you've got?" "Yes. Before I met Queen, this is all I knew."
Han Sen nodded.
Black Steel was shocked. He stopped using his knife and asked, "When did she teach you this?" "A few days ago," Han Sen said lackadaisically. Black Steel looked even more confused, and he tried asking, "Aside from this skill, what others do you know?" "Others, but they aren't very popular." Han Sen could not expose the extent of his knife skill, but he was quite good. Black Steel looked at Han Sen with continued confusion. He threw his knife to the ground and said coldly, "There is no point in beating you now, then. I will fight you once you have learned all of the teeth knife techniques." Han Sen shrugged his shoulder. He was never interested in pointless fights. "What is this knife rain?" Han Sen asked Black Steel. Han Sen did not think he would be a difficult person to get along with. "Queen didn't tell you before you came?" Black Steel frowned. Han Sen shook his head. "Queen didn't tell me anything. She just told me to come here, and that was that." Black Steel quietly said, "Queen is indeed different. She has her own plans, though, I assume. If she didn't tell you." After a pause, Black Steel went on to say, "These volcanoes are the graves of the knives. A lot of knives are buried here, and the knives come out when the tunnel is opened. They await a new master. We are here to select new weapons for ourselves. We are also being picked by the weaponry. There won't be good quality knives at the beginning, mind you. Later on, there will be a higher chance of finding good knives. But even so, they are rare. You need to get them, but also earn their approval. For that, you will require power and luck. Where did these weapons come from, then? Han Sen asked, with shock. I do not know, but this portal opens once a year. Where the knives actually come from, I've never been told. If they are not chosen, they will return to their graves. They await the next host of participants in a year's time, with the hope they might be chosen, Black Steel said. Does that mean the weapons we take belong to us? Han Sen thought to himself. He wanted to collect a few, so he could give them to his family. It would be best to give them to his son, his grandson, and great-grandson, in case he could never return. Our race has a rule. Only one knife can be taken by each person. Black Steel looked at Han Sen coldly, as if he knew what Han Sen was thinking. Oh, really? Han Sen looked disappointed, but then he asked, towards the end, what might their level be? Are any of them deified knives? Black Steel's mouth twitched. He knew Han Sen was a greedy person who was not even concerned with hiding that fact. He had no clue why Queen might accept a student such as this. I don't know. The knife rain will fall once an hour, however. After the 7th rain comes, Viscount class blades will become available. It'll be hard to dodge those knives. Across the years, no one has lasted longer than 10 rounds. The best knives that have ever been found were Duke knives. Black Steel answered Han Sen's question. Duke class? That's not bad.
Han Sen nodded.
Black Steel felt as if he had been talking far too much to Han Senator. Strangely, he was also in a brighter mood. He couldn't help but ask Han Sen, did you bring any high-tier armor and weapons with you to this place?
No.
Queen said I did not have to. Han Sen looked at Black Steel, and it seemed as if he had not brought anything either. Black Steel said, do you think a Baron can block a Viscount knife rain? The knife rain is not like this, and it could last up to 10 minutes. When they fall down, they will come with the full strength of a Viscount's attack. Without high-tier armor and weapons, how well do you think you will fare in the blocking? Han Sen looked at Black Steel without speaking. If the high-tier armor and weapons worked, Isha would have let him bring them. But Black Steel hadn't brought his either, so there must have been a reason for that. Black Steel continued by saying, it is actually pointless to bring them. Bringing those items will only help you last a bit longer. But if you bring other items to help you, the knives you wish for will not choose to follow you. They would sooner break themselves than allow themselves to be used by the likes of you. You have to use your own, raw power to obtain the weapon of your choice. It's all down to you, and a modicum of luck. During the 7th reign, maybe I can find an Earl weapon. After that, there might be Marquis and Duke. But they are extremely rare, and that really will depend on your luck. After Black Steel said this, he ignored Han Senator. He took off in the direction of a volcano. Where are you going? Han Sen followed him. Black Steel seemed okay with this. Han Sen thought following a guy who knew the way might be better than venturing out on his own. This way, he could definitely learn more. Let's go to the knife grave. There might be knives of a higher tier there, Black Steel said as he walked. Seeing Han Sen follow him, he stopped and asked, why aren't you looking for them by yourself? Why are you following me? It'll take a while for things to reach the 7th round of knife rain. If I come with you, I can learn stuff from you. I will go find them by myself once we reach the 7th rain.
Han Sen låghed.
Black Steel hummed and said, I'm afraid you might not even last 7 rounds. He might have said this, but there was no sign that Black Steel actually wanted to remove Han Sen from his presence. He was headed towards the volcano. He was headed to Knife Grave. They walked side by side, and when they reached the volcano, Black Steel threw a knife at Han Sr. You are lucky. This is a Baron knife for you. It is quite rare to find on the first round. With this, you should be able to last a few rounds extra. Thanks. Han Sen swung his knife. The knife was smooth to wield. Black Steel ignored him and kept walking to the volcano. When he was halfway, he found another Baron knife. It looks like you have an interest in knives, Han Sen said with curiosity. The knife did not have the word Baron written down on it, so, amidst all the knives that were there, he couldn't distinguish one from the other. Black Steel seemed to be able to tell with just a glance. That meant he was probably pretty good. Black Steel answered, I have practiced knife skills since I was young, and our family produces knives anyway. So, I can determine the quality with ease. Good, Han Sen thought. He then said, if you are that good, why don't we cooperate? You select a knife for me. Han Sen thought there were too many weapons, as they were everywhere. Finding a good quality one would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. With a professional, things would go much better. Black Steel rolled his eyes and said, I help you pick and you do what? I will block some of the knife rain for you, Han Sen said. Black Steel lifted his lips and ignored him. He sat down on a rock and placed the knife on his leg. He closed his eyes and waited for the next round to begin. Little Black, are you a rebate? And your father is a king? How can you not have teeth knife? There was still a while to go before the next knife rain came, so Han Sen tried to talk to Black Steel. Hearing Han Sen call him Little Black, his eye twitched. He held back the urge to cut Han Sen down and simply closed his eyes. I know you must be the playful sort. I bet you like hitting on girls or something, to have skipped the years that would have allowed you to learn teeth knife. Han Sen was curious. Teeth knife was so strong. So why was it that Roxfall Duke had learned it, whereas Black Steel hadn't? Black Steel's eyelids twitched. He stared at Han Sen and said, Do you think everyone is as lucky as you? Teeth knife is a rebate skill, but not many people have the ability to practice it. Only 6 people know it right now, and Queen is the only one that is capable of mastering it. I want to learn from her, but she does not think I am capable of learning it. You can go and find the other 5, Han Sen said. Black Steel hummed and said, I want to learn from the best. If I can't learn it from her, I won't accept it from anyone less. Queen recommended that I learn another skill, anyway, so I don't need teeth knife. What is the skill you are learning, then? Han Sen asked. Black Steel coldly said, Cut steel knife. That sounds powerful. Is that the skill you were using? Han Sen's eyes opened wide. He was looking quite shocked. Black Steel saw Han Sen was only pretending to be shocked, so he could extract more information, and felt his own eyelids repeatedly flicker with a twitch. He stood up and focused on getting to the top of the mountain. Little Black, where are you going? Han Sen asked as he followed. I have a death wish. If you are afraid of dying, then I recommend that you don't come any further. When the grave erupts, you'll be slaughtered, Black Steel said coldly. Then, he went ahead to reach the peak. Han Sen did not believe Black Steel was going to die, and he was quite happy to have finally met someone with a fine temper. He wasn't going to let him go off quite so easily. So, Han Sen followed him up to the peak. It was like a real volcano there. When Han Sen looked down, it looked like a meat grinder beneath him, with a sea of knives all lying together. They lined up like the layers of teeth within the maws of a monster. It was a scary sight to see. At the bottom, there was a red juice. It was lava, presumably. The weapons appeared to be ticking out from the liquid. Little Black, can we find a weapon amidst those? The weapons are all together, right? So, the good ones should be easier to find. Han Sen couldn't take his eyes off the knife grave. Black Steel coldly said, If you aren't afraid of dying, you can certainly try. Han Sen thought his life was more important. He wasn't familiar with this place, so it was best not to risk it all by trying to venture in. While Han Sen was thinking about this, Black Steel was actually climbing down already. Little Black, why are you going down?
Han Sen log surprised.
I am not afraid of dying, Black Steel said simply. He was clutching a knife as he made his descent. Han Sen decided to follow. The knives were all crisscrossed, and the places you could grab onto were just the blades. It was like you were climbing a knife mountain. Fortunately, those blades were fairly poor. They were like the ones that had just fallen in the first rain. And since the dull knives weren't currently falling out of the sky, they weren't really dangerous. Little Black, Han Sen said, just as he felt the blades start to shake. The steel juice at the bottom was beginning to bubble and boil. It looked ready to fly upwards. Black Steel gave Han Sen a signal to be quiet. He stayed silent, and then the knives and the steel juice became calm. Han Sen tried to copy him and kept on climbing. It seemed like Black Steel had brought him here just to get him to shut up. The lower they got, the sharper the knives became. They were surrounded by knives now, and if the knives started to move, Han Sen and Black Steel would be turned into pincushions. Even if the knives didn't move, Han Sen could imagine the fate that would await him if he slipped. But Han Sen was not afraid, and neither was Black Steel. In reality, he had nothing to be afraid of. He could always fly for a short time, and here, that would be enough to get him to safety. And furthermore, He had the Taurus shield. There was no way that the blades of a baron could harm it. Then again, if Han Sen used the shield, he wasn't sure if the knives would still want him. They climbed down quietly, getting closer and closer to the steel juice. Black Steel had only decided to come here because Han Sen had asked so many questions. The curiosity of wondering if there were any knives being born also played a part. But there had only been one reign, and the good knives wouldn't be revealed just yet. Han Sen wasn't too hopeful. When he looked at the seething steel juice, he saw a pitch-black horse knife resting halfway within the liquid. The air was insanely hot that close to the liquid steel, but the sight still gave Han Sen the chills. Han Sen was thinking, that's a good knife. The knife was inside the steel juice. Han Sen tried reaching for it, but he was short by 2 arm lengths. He didn't dare to move suddenly. If he shifted his weight too much, it would undoubtedly make the knives move, and the grave might even erupt at a faster pace. Even if their bodies were built of steel, they would still be sliced and diced into dust. Black Steel frowned. He thought the horse knife was a Viscount-class weapon. If he got it now, it would help him reach the 7th round. It was difficult to find a weapon such as that before the 7th reign. That knife might even carry him all the way to the 10th round. If he gave up now and waited until the eruption, the knife might end up at a random location several hundred miles away. It'd be hard to find it. But there was no way he could reach it just as Black Steel was giving up. Han Sen came down next to him and got his attention, then grabbed his arm. Black Steel understood what he meant. Han Sen wanted to lift him and let him reach out for the knife. Black Steel didn't hesitate. He grabbed Han Sen's hand and lowered himself down. Han Sen grabbed the nearest blade and let Black Steel dangle slowly downwards. Black Steel's fingers were so close to the prize he wanted, the horse knife. His forehead dripped with sweat, knowing that he was making a risky move. If they did something to detonate the grave, they would die right then and there. Black Steel's hands weren't shaking, though. He got close to the horse knife that was still half within the juice, and very carefully, he drew the knife out. He moved with precision, bringing the knife out slowly to avoid creating waves. It took him an entire minute to remove it fully. Suddenly, a drop of sweat dripped off of Black Steel's face. It fell into the steel juice and then, shah! White smoke billowed up. The steel juice bubbled. The knives began to rattle and shake. They were pointing at the pair, freezing them in place. After a while, the knives and the steel juice settled down again. Black Steel put the knife away and nodded up at Han Sen. Han Sen acknowledged Black Steel's signal and then slowly pulled him up. He brought him back to the wall of knives they had come down from. Black Steel was now carrying his new knife, which was slung across his back. He signaled Han Sen, and then they climbed back out of the volcano. They did so in tandem, as quietly as they could. When they both climbed out of the knife grave, Black Steel looked relieved. His clothes were soaking wet. The stunt they had performed was too dangerous, and he had very nearly been killed. Black Steel looked at Han Senator. He noticed Han Sen standing comfortably beside him, as if he was entirely unshaken, like he wasn't bothered by the risk they had just taken. His forehead was dry and without sweat, like nothing at all had just happened. I don't know if he is ignorant or arrogant, Black Steel thought to himself. Regardless, his view of Han Sen was starting to change. You own half of this knife, so we should talk about how best we split it. When they were down off the mountain, Black Steel pointed at the knife and said this. I don't need it. Consider that my service fee, paid in full. When I need to identify one for myself later, perhaps you can help me with that, Han Sen smiled. Do you know what knife this is? Black Steel asked. Han Sen shook his head. What is it? The weapon lacked an energy signature, and with Han Sen not being an expert, he could not discern the level of the blade. This is an Earl weapon, Black Steel said. An Earl? I thought it might be higher. I need one that is at least a Duke. You can help me find one like that, okay? With a bit of luck and a sprinkle of hope, it'll be a king. It'd be even better if it was deified. Han Sen looked grossly dismayed, and he didn't seem to think much of an Earl knife. Black Steel slung the knife back over his shoulder and just ignored Han Senator. He found a place in the foothills to sit down, where they could wait for the next round of rain. It took a long time for it to come, but it looked set to begin again soon. While they were talking, a loud noise sounded. The knife grave erupted and a pillar was fired into the sky. Then, The rain of knives began to fall. Black Steel took out his horse knife and chucked a Baron-class knife to Han. Senator Han Sen's Baron weapon swiftly rose to knock away the knives that were falling from the sky. That round was mainly about using ordinary weapons. So ordinary, not even Baron weapons were necessary. They got through it with ease. Why don't we enter the knife grave again? Perhaps a high-tier weapon might now be found, Han Sen suggested. Black Steel shook his head and said, after the second wave, many of the weapons on the walls are Baron. Their power will be stronger. If you touch them, they'll immediately start rioting. Unless you can fly in and out, you won't be able to get back down there. Han Sen looked disappointed, and he gave up on the idea of heading back. Together, they both endured another 2 washes of knife rain. After the 5th storm, Black Steel decided to head to the mountain and take a look. He looked at the knives in the mountain and then returned. Little Black, does your family have a deified knife? Does anyone have deified treasure in Narrow Moon? Han Sen asked, curious what the young man would answer. Black Steel just ignored him. The best way to deal with Han Sen, he had now figured, was keeping quiet. After 5 waves of rain, it would still be difficult to find another Earl weapon. If their luck wasn't too poor, they could at least find a Viscount weapon. Black Steel wanted to find a Viscount weapon right now. They walked around for a bit before stumbling across 3 others who were also in the pursuit of another weapon. Those 3 saw Han Sen and Black Steel and decided to come over to greet them. Black Steel, why are you with him? A rebate with gold ears looked at Han Sen and then frowned at Black Steel. I stand with whoever I choose to, Black Steel said coldly. The woman looked a little said after the rebuttal, and a rebate man that was beside her said, Black Steel, don't be so arrogant. You are only the son of Black Moon King. If you are as good as you pose yourself to be, how come Knife Queen did not accept you as a student instead of this useless outsider? A strange-looking outsider laughed and said, he couldn't become Queen's student, but he can be friends with the student himself. Maybe when he gets close, he thinks Queen will soften, and then accept him as the next student. Black Steel pulled out his knife and swung it with rage. The outsider raised his knife and fought back, but he only had a Baron weapon, and it was quickly shattered by the horse knife. To the outsider's shock, he was then cut in half. His blood spread across the ground. Is that an Earl's weapon? The man and woman trembled. They looked right at Black Steel's horse knife. The man yelled at Black Steel and said, Black Steel, are you really killing people here? Do you think you can do anything you please? Whoever insults Queen will die, Black Steel said icily, not even looking at them. The man and the woman were still reeling from shock. It was supposed to only have been a bit of chit-chat. If this event went public, it'd be a death wish. But if people knew it was the outsider who had insulted Queen, they would think Black Steel had performed a good kill. The man hummed and did not say anything. He looked at Han Sen and said, the student that Queen accepted must be decent. I want to learn from you. The man no longer dared to provoke Black Steel, who had an Earl weapon. So, he was going to take out his angst on Han Sen. You own half of this knife, Black Steel said, before tossing the horse knife to Han Sen. The man was angered by this, and he said, Black Steel, you. Han Sen threw the knife back to Black Steel and smiled. I am Knife Queen's student. Using this would be bullying, so instead, I'll use this. After that, Han Sen picked up a random knife off the ground. It was ordinary, and didn't even have a rank. Isha told Han Sen he had to prove himself if he wished to obtain more resources. So, Han Sen wanted this opportunity to show off. Now that this man had willingly delivered himself on a platter, Han Sen wasn't going to let this chance slip away. The man, who was named Gauss, looked at Han Sen angrily. If Han Sen had been using the Earl horse knife, he assuredly wouldn't have been as enraged as he was now. But Han Sen wasn't using the horse knife, and neither was he using the knife he had been keeping with him. He just picked up a random blade off the ground. It was insulting, and that only fueled Gauss' anger. I want to see how cocky you can get. Gauss brought out his own pirate knife. It was just a little bit shiny. That was a Viscount weapon. He had managed to find it after the 4th reign. He was just a Baron, though, and he couldn't make use of all its power. Still, the knife itself had a grand sharpness to it. With Han Sen now making use of an unranked knife, It'd likely crumble and break if the two knives collided. Han Sen didn't really care, though. He swung his knife and thought it was pretty great for what it was. It was stable to wield, and it was definitely the sort of knife you'd use for chopping. Why are you standing there? I thought you were going to teach me a lesson. Come on, Han Sen said to Gauss. Gauss' face looked grim. Without saying a word, he stepped forward and tried to attack Han Senator. The pirate knife came like a shadow, trying to ensnare Han Sen like a net. Gauss' knife skills were good. The power and speed showed off a high level of experience. His technique was no weaker than Teeth Knife, as well. Teeth Knife was not just focused on prowess, though. It was the technique itself, and how it revolved around that teeth power, that made it stand out. But Gauss was going after Han Senator. Han Sen might have looked young, but he was like an ancient beast. Han Sen's skill and experiences could not be remotely compared to what Gauss had endured in his lifetime. The scary thing was that they were both barons, yet Han Sen's fitness was far higher than Gauss or any other barons. There might have been some who were as strong as Han Sen, but they didn't belong to the rebate. No rebate baron had that level of power. Seeing Gauss' knife net coming down to land on him, Han Sen stepped forward. He held up his knife and let the net fall onto it. Gauss was shocked. His skill was called Shadow Knife, and rather than creating a real net, it made illusions. Many shadows fell from the sky, but one of them would be lethal. Normal people would not be able to tell which was the real shadow and which were fake, so most would retreat and attempt to block. This was the first time he had seen someone so willing to come against it where they stood. You would need a lot of confidence to stick to your guns like that. And all the shadows Han Sen bumped into were illusions, too. He somehow avoided the real knife. How did he know where my real blade was? Gauss was shocked. He moved his body with the desire of striking again. But it was too late. The others watched as Han Sen leaped through the net, raced over to Gauss, and drew his knife like a cobra strike. The sides of Gauss' neck had fanged cuts in them, as if he had actually been bitten by a snake. Blood seeped out of the bite marks. Gauss held onto his neck as he stumbled back. His face turned pale. The woman that accompanied him looked shocked. She couldn't use Teeth Knife herself, but she recognized it. Han Sen was using Tusk. All it took was one meager strike to heavily damage Gauss. In Narrow Moon, Gauss had to be in the top 5 of his class. His Shadow Knife was not as good as Teeth Knife, but it was still fairly infamous. Gauss also had a Viscount weapon, and the woman struggled to believe he had been unable to block Han Sen's attack. Let's leave. Gauss stared at Han Sen as he clutched his bleeding neck. He turned to leave. He knew if Han Sen had attacked any deeper, he'd have been a dead man. When Gauss had left, Black Steel turned to Han Sr. When you fought me, you didn't use all your power. Weren't you doing the same? Han Sen smiled and dropped the knife back on the ground. He went on to say, let's go. We should see if we can find a better knife. The knife rain itself will be harder to deal with than those people were. It'll be terrible if I don't get a good one. Oh, and if you can, could you teach me how to identify knives? No, Black Steel refused. Then he walked forward to continue their search for a decent knife. Han Sen shrugged his shoulders and followed Black Steel. He saw the weapons all about and noticed that they didn't radiate any power. All he could see was that they each looked different. Black Steel hailed from a family of blacksmiths. Before the 6th round, though, he found a Viscount weapon. Black Steel gifted the leaf knife to Han Senator when Han Sen held it. He thought it felt different from the others. The texture was different. In a hall that looked palatial, a rebate man slowly approached and looked at Knife Queen. Why take a student like that? That's not very you. Moonwheel King, why should you care about which student I accept? Isha responded evenly. Moonwheel King smiled. You don't have to answer to me on what students you accept, but you gave out resources that belong to the rebate. For this, you must provide an explanation. Is my student not worthy of a spot in the space tunnel? Isha said. Your student might be worth hundreds of slots, but he is an outsider. Things aren't so simple. Do you really want to raise him? Moonwheel King asked. That is my business. Don't worry about it. Isha looked cold. I just want to remind you of our rules. Don't forget them. No one controls the entire race. Not you. Not I, Moonwheel King said slowly. I know better than you do. There's no need for you to remind me. Good. Moonwheel King smiled and then left. Seeing him leave, Isha frowned. The things he said could not have been just him talking. Other kings must have been whispering in his ear. Otherwise, he wouldn't have bothered coming. Han Sen, it is all down to you now, and how far you can go. Isha sighed. Even now, Isha was not entirely sure whether or not she should commit to developing Han Sen. Isha pursued an investigation of the story of genes. Revising something so complicated was difficult and could even yield dangerous results. But if no changes were made to it, learning it would be too hard. Raising Han Sen to Duke level would be easy, and the resource cost would not be too hefty. But the story of genes made things far more complicated than she had anticipated. And raising Han Sen to Duke had been far more expensive than she expected. There was nobody around, except for a few guards outside the tunnel's entrance. But Narrow Moon had a lot of people watching the exit, and that included the kings. They wanted to know more about the student Knife Queen had accepted. They wanted to know what made him so impressive that Queen herself would raise him. They were different from the ordinary rebate. They did not believe Knife Queen would spend so much time and resources on some random noob. They were guessing Knife Queen wanted Han Sen's deified feather. And although one deified feather could not make you deified, it had deified genes. It could still help semi-deify an elite. Look at the time. They should almost be out by now. Inside the garden, one rebate king was looking at the exit, talking to himself. The black vortex flashed suddenly, and someone came out. The rebate who were watching the exit looked shocked, seeing this person. Why is it Gauss? Everyone was surprised. Of the 10 barons that had entered, Gauss should have placed much higher. He could have been in the top 5, or even the top 3. But for someone like him to be the first one out, it was quite the surprise. Everyone looked at the weapon Gauss had taken. It was the pirate knife. Its power had been unleashed as it left the tunnel, and the nobles could see that it was a Viscount weapon. Just a Viscount? Many people were disappointed by Gauss' performance, especially the one who had recommended him. You are injured. You need healing. The guards saw Gauss' neck wounds. Many of the elites felt as if something was amiss. The 7th knife range should be happening about now. Gauss had a Viscount weapon, and he could have lasted another 2 rounds. There had to be a reason why he had come out now. Everyone looked at Gauss' wounds, and when they saw them, they were all in shock. Obviously, the cuts had been created by Teeth Knife. They were not infected by the teeth power, but you could tell they had been created by the Teeth Knife's tusk component. Gauss was injured by Han Sen. Everyone was taken aback. Out of the 10 barons inside, it was likely Han Sen was the only one that knew about Teeth Knife. It could only have been Han Sen who had hurt him. A king that was sitting in the hall, watching the tunnel, looked strangely at the scene. It looks like the outsider students are not simple. If he had struck any deeper, Gauss would be dead. No baron should have the control and skill to be this precise. How long have you been teaching him? Moonwheel King frowned. Even Isha looked shocked, seeing the wounds on Gauss' neck. She had taught Han Sen only once, for a few days. Han Sen had used Tusk to defeat Gauss, but at the same time spare his life. Her student was better than she believed him to be. Just a few days, and he is capable of this? Is he really that talented? Isha thought to herself. As time passed, more and more barons emerged. Han Sen was not amongst the ones that exited. It's the 10th reign, and they still haven't come out? Moonwheel King frowned. It wasn't just Moonwheel King who was this surprised, either. Other kings and nobles were still surprised to see that Han Sen had not yet come out. If he hadn't died in there, it was interesting to consider the prospects of why he had not yet returned. I am sorry, Darkmoon King. I have disappointed you. In the hall, Gauss kowtowed before a king and looked very embarrassed.
Han Sen hurt you.
Darkmoon King said coldly. Yes. Gauss did not dare to lie. Tell me what happened, and don't skip a single detail. No lying, Darkmoon King said. He looked fairly calm. Gauss' body shook as he explained what had happened. Darkmoon King frowned upon hearing the story. Just one hit? Knife Queen really put everything into that outsider. The rumors about Black Steel killing an outsider began to propagate, but no one spoke a word about it. Even the elders that had recommended the outsider did not comment on it. He had said something he was not supposed to, and Black Steel killed him for it. He had it coming. If Knife Queen heard what he had said, his fate would have been far worse. Everyone wondered why Han Sen and Black Steel still hadn't come out. 7 of them had exited, and only those 2 were still living inside there. If they haven't come out, then that means they managed to make it through the 11th round. If they are lucky enough, they might be able to find a Duke weapon. Isha smiled. Han Sen's performance far exceeded her modest expectations. With Han Sen's performance, if she wanted to invest in him, she'd undoubtedly take less pressure for the decision. Black Moon King was also happy that Black Steak was still going on. The other kings and elders felt differently, though. No one knew what they were thinking about. In Knife Grave, Han Sen and Black Steel were scaling a mountain. They were looking for higher-tier weaponry. Black Steel looked happy as he took off running towards a knife he had spotted. After the 11th knife rain, there were so many knives on the ground. They were all over the place, and there was hardly a place to step. Han Sen's feet walked across the handles, and Black Steel was standing in front of a knife. Han Sen thought the knife looked fairly normal, but Black Steel looked surprised. He pulled it out carefully and held it with both hands. He happily said, "This is a Duke weapon. It doesn't look like one." Han Sen saw the dim-looking light of the blade and felt impartial towards it. "We are in the Knife Grave. It is still sleeping, mind you. The power is suppressed. Once you leave this place, you'll be able to see how great this is." After that, Black Steel gave the knife to Han Sr. "The knife you have wanted me to find you is this. Now, we no longer owe each other anything. You don't want it?" Han Sen waved it around a bit. It felt great, but Han Sen was not wholly satisfied. "There is still a lot of time to go, so there is the chance I'll be able to find another." Black Steel continued walking. He didn't look back once. Han Sen followed Black Steel for a long time and marveled at the amount he knew about the place. After the 11th knife rain, there were many more higher-tier weapons on the ground. But finding something of Duke class was still not a simple task. Aside from having the ability to spot one, you'd need more than a modicum of luck. On that giant planet, which was covered in millions of knives, finding a Duke weapon would be harder than finding a needle in a haystack. There were more higher-tier knives, but the ordinary ones still reigned in countless numbers. The ratio of good knives and bad knives didn't change, though. There were just more of both. Black Steel had randomly given Han Sen the Duke knife, which had surprised Han Sen. The land was wide. Han Sen and Black Steel were like 2 ants afloat in a sharp sea. Knives were everywhere, and the sight of them made Han Sen's eyes go funny. Han Sen swore he had never seen so many knives in his life before. Time passed, and Black Steel was unable to find another Duke knife. He hadn't been able to find a Marquis one, even. It looked like the Duke knife had exhausted both of their luck. Boom! The ground began to rumble as the volcano of knives began to rattle and shake again. The pillar fired up into the sky and illuminated the clouds. It made the sky look like an ocean of lava. Again! Han Sen shouted at Black Steel. He pulled out the Duke scimitar and looked up at the crimson clouds. Black Steel raised his head and stood up straight. He was holding 2 knives now. One of them was the horse knife, and the other was a short knife. The latter was an earl weapon. Boom! The lava in the sky rumbled and roared like thunder. The knives came soaring down, dripping with the steel juice of their origin. The sky was filled by what looked like an endless display of meteors.
Han Sen loked grim.
They were all Viscount weapons, and they were accelerating as they descended to the ground with full power. Han Sen was holding a Duke weapon, but its power was asleep. Han Sen needed his power to activate it. But being the Baron he was, there was a limit to what he was able to do. So, all he had to rely on was the sharpness of the blade itself. In the 11th reign, Han Sen had seen how powerful a Viscount's sword could be. He and Black Steel had barely managed to hold on and make it through. This knife rain was much scarier than the 11th, though. That much was for certain. Pang, 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 pang. All the knives came racing down like a barrage of infinite missiles. They annihilated the earth, as countless knives shattered into pieces. The scariest thing about all of this was how the knife rain was falling. It wasn't a shower. It was a fuichon heavy rain that did not seem to relent. Han Sen was waving his Duke knife. He clutched it tight, swinging at every knife that looked set to land on him. His finesse ensured none touched him. But Han Sen only had one knife, and he did not have a shield. He cut the knives that were raining down from directly above, but he wasn't able to cut the ones that were in his proximity. The falling knives exploded when struck, shattering. Many were broken. Scattershotting Han Senator, they gave him a number of cuts, proving his barren armor could not stop them. Black Steel was faring much worse, though. Han Sen had mutant blood power, so his wounds would not bleed. If he hurt his skin, he could still keep going. But Black Steel could bleed, and he was soaked with the many lacerations that covered his body. The knives rained down like a bombing run. It was scarier than the Blitz. At least bombing sometimes provided a gap or berth to breathe. These knives wouldn't stop for a moment. Han Sen's Duke knife was sharp, but hitting those knives made his arm numb. His hands slowly began to crack. The knife rain, after lasting 10 minutes, showed no sign of stopping. Han Sen and Black Steel were fighting the knives back to back. They both held aside, and slowly, things began to get better. This knife rain is lasting too long. We can't hold on. We have to leave, Han Sen shouted, as he continued slashing and slashing. You go first. I haven't found the knife I am looking for, Black Steel said, while swinging his knife like a madman. I'll give you mine, and I'll take any, Han Sen said. It's yours, not mine, Black Steel said calmly. Are you crazy? Han Sen kept swinging his knife. You leave first, Black Steel insisted, continuing to wave his knife. F***ck no. Han Sen slashed, cutting through a number of knives that were about to skewer his head. Boom! The sky trumpeted with thunderous sounds again. The lava in the sky seemed to explode. The rain poured from the sky. Knives! Countless knives. The knives came down like a torrential flood. They streamed down from above with the strength of a raging river. It'd be enough to destroy the sky and earth. Why have they still not returned? Someone asked from the entrance to the tunnel. Black Moon King had arrived before the space tunnel, and he was waiting for his son. When Black Moon King was young, he himself had entered the space tunnel. He knew how difficult the hardships were on the other side. Right now, those beyond ought to have been on the 12th round of rain. Since Black Steel hadn't come out yet, there were only two possibilities. The first option was that Black Steel was incredibly lucky, and he had found an incredible opportunity. The second option was that he was dead. In the past, barons had only managed to reach the 11th stage. That was the height of their power. No one had ever successfully made it through the 12th. There was once a son of a king who was so ambitious, he stole a duke's armor and took it to Knife Grave. He wanted to see how many rounds the knife rain would ultimately last. But on the 12th round, the young man came stumbling out with the duke's armor mostly in tatters. When he was questioned, the baron told his father that on the 12th round, the knives came down like an endless stream. Even his duke armor quickly broke down under the strain. The baron had managed to escape right before the duke armor was entirely broken. If he hadn't gotten out in time, he would have been killed. That was why barons never attempted to take duke armors with them. That young man's tale told everyone just how scary and powerful the knife rains could become. Black Moon King had already been waiting much longer than he had expected, but Black Steel was still inside. That was his only son, and he was incredibly worried. He stared at the black hole-like vortex. He was surrounded by many other nobles, eager to see the final result. His hands clenched into a pair of fists as his own nails dug into his skin. He was never this nervous, not even when he was fighting someone. Isha was not in front of the tunnel, but she still frowned and stared toward the entrance. On the Knife Grave planet, the Knife River came down like a tsunami from the sky. It felt as if it was going to cut the entire planet in half. Han Sen and Black Steel's faces changed. They felt awful. They did not have duke armor, and neither did they have an escape route. Suddenly, the Knife River was practically above their heads. Black Steel lobbed his horse knife and took Han Sen's duke knife. Holding two knives, he jumped at the mass of the river and yelled, "Run!" The knives came at the river like a whirlwind, tearing apart the skies. Black Steel managed to cut the Knife River in half. It was only for a second, though, and the Knife River swiftly managed to bridge and refill the divide. Catcha! With the impact he brought against the Knife River, Black Steel's Earl weapon was broken against the tide. His hand bled. As a result, his other hand, that was clutching the Duke knife, now had a few crevices running across it. The impact with the knife river was too strong. The Duke knife was pushed to the side. The knives rushed by Black Steel like water. Black Steel looked at the knife river, and his eyes moved. He realized he would die this time, and there was no way out for him. Seeing endless knives line up together, so close to his body, it would only take a second for them to chop and dice him into pieces. But the knives suddenly stopped, and they froze where they were in the air. They hung there, motionless, blanketing the sky. The knives were almost into his flesh and his eyes, but the spectacle had all suddenly stopped. Shah! Shah! Suddenly, it was like time began running backwards. The knives reversed course. They moved 100 meters away before coming to a stop. The weapons started to spin, and so too did the ones on the ground. Countless weapons were spinning like tornadoes. They were everywhere, and Black Steel couldn't even have guessed how many there were. As the weapons spun, they also began to tremble. It seemed almost like they were afraid of something. Black Steel slowly turned around and looked at Han. Senator Han Sen's clothes were waving as he cast his knife mind. He looked like a beast that was on the verge of ripping the galaxy apart. How is that possible? Black Steel looked at Han Sen. Han Sen possessed a knife mind that was greater than that of Black Steel's father, Black Moon King. Even Knife Queen was likely inferior to him. Han Sen now had Black Steel's horse knife. He had planned to use his knife mind and centaur shield so they could think about what they might do to escape the space tunnel. The effects of using the knife mind were more surprising than anticipated, however. It looked as if the knives felt his knife mind, and they sought to back off. Han Sen no longer needed to summon his shield anymore. Han Sen's knife mind came from the scabbard. The scabbard's knife mind originated with the rebate, their only deified elite. Han Sen's power was far worse, of course, but even so, his knife mind was deified in caliber. Although it wasn't as good as the real thing, it was still good. The knives weren't creatures, but when they felt the knife mind, they were shocked. That was why they were shaking and unable to leave. Suddenly, a knife fell from the sky and hit the ground. It almost landed on Han Sen's head. Han Sen fell back and dodged it. He looked down and saw the knife that was now protruding from a rock. The scabbard and the handle were all rusted, and there was no handguard at all. It looked like a steel rod that was just a little bit curved. Weird. All these knives are scared of the knife mind. So, why did this one decide to come down? Han Sen thought to himself. He knelt by the knife, grabbed it by the handle, and tried to pull it from the rock. Han Sen wanted to remove it from the rock and see what might have been special about it, but it didn't budge. He tried yanking it a few times, but nothing worked. Little Black, why can I not pull this out? Han Sen asked over his shoulder, just as the knife jerked out of the ground. He tossed it to Black Steel for inspection. Han Sen put away his knife mind. The weapons then seemed to lose all support, and they all fell to the ground. Within the proximity of 100 meters, weapons were everywhere. Black Steel looked at Han Sen strangely, then he looked at the knife in his hands. Then he threw it back to Han Sen, saying, "This is not a long knife with a scabbard. It is a knife's child or a knife stick. It isn't a knife yet. It's half finished."